A little girl just ran toward the most dangerous man in the city. And nobody stopped her. Not because they couldn't, because they were too afraid to get close enough to try. She was 8 years old, wearing a school uniform that had been washed so many times the blue had started fading at the edges. Her braids were coming loose. Her backpack was bouncing against her tiny spine. And she was running. Not the way children run when they're playing, but the way people run when everything they love is on the line. The kind of running that comes from somewhere deep, somewhere primal. The kind that doesn't stop until the body physically can't go any further. Past Gucci, past Prada, past Louis Vuitton, past people in designer clothes who stopped and stared, then looked away. And I need you to understand something before we go any further. Every single adult on that street that afternoon saw what was happening. Not one of them moved. Her face was soaked. Her chest was heaving. Her small hands were balled into fists at her sides, not from anger, but from the kind of fear that grips your whole body and refuses to let go. She wasn't thinking about danger. She wasn't thinking about consequences. She was thinking about one person. The only person in her entire world that mattered. Her mother. And her mother needed help right now. She stopped. Right there. On those polished cobblestones, in front of a man surrounded by other men who didn't smile. A man whose name made grown people lower their voices in the middle of sentences. A man people crossed entire city blocks to avoid, not out of courtesy, out of survival. She looked straight up at him, chin trembling, eyes flooding, chest barely holding together, and in a voice so broken it could shatter glass, she said the words that stopped time. "They're beating my mama. Please help." The entire street went silent. And what this man did next, nobody on that street, nobody who heard this story afterward, nobody who thought they knew who he was ready for. Who was this little girl? And what kind of desperation drives a child straight toward danger instead of away from it? Who was this man, and what could possibly exist inside someone built entirely from power, silence, and fear that a crying 8-year-old could reach in 30 seconds flat? Those are the two questions this story is going to answer. And I'll tell you this right now. The answer to the second one will change the way you see people you think you already understand. Because here is what we know. A child made a decision that afternoon that most grown adults would never have the courage to make. She didn't wait for someone else to fix it. She didn't freeze. She didn't hide under a bed and cry into her knees, even though every part of her small body was shaking. She chose, deliberately, purposefully, with everything she had, and the man she ran to, the man this entire city whispered about, was about to make a choice of his own. One that would cost him something he never expected to spend. We are going back to the beginning now, because to understand what happened on that street, you first need to understand who these people really were before fate put them in the same place at the same time. And what you are about to find out about this little girl will hit you somewhere you were not expecting. Before we go any deeper into this story, drop a comment right now and let us know where you're watching from. We have viewers tuning in from all across the country, and we would love to hear from you. And if you are new here, hit that subscribe button right now because this story is only getting started. Her name was Celeste, and if you passed her on the street, you probably wouldn't look twice. That was the thing about Celeste. She had mastered the art of being invisible. Not because she was weak, but because survival had taught her that drawing attention to yourself when you have nothing costs more than it gives. She was 34 years old. Slim, tired in the way that lives behind the eyes. Not just in the body. She kept her hair pulled back tight every morning because loose hair meant extra minutes. And extra minutes were a luxury she had not owned in years. She wore the same 2 pairs of work shoes in rotation. She knew exactly which one squeaked on tile and which one didn't. Because in the houses she cleaned, you learned quickly that the sound of your presence was considered an interruption. Every morning, Celeste was out of her apartment before the sun finished rising. She would walk 14 blocks from the narrow 2-bedroom she rented in the Fairfield district. Past the bus stops, past the corner store with the flickering sign, past the elementary school where Zuri would arrive 3 hours later, and straight into the gleaming heart of the luxury corridor where she spent her days cleaning other people's lives. She polished marble countertops in penthouses she would never afford. She folded linen that cost more than her monthly rent. She organized closets full of shoes that had never touched a cracked sidewalk, and she did it all without complaint, without bitterness, without a single moment of self-pity, at least not one she let anyone see. Because everything she did for one reason. Zuri. At night, no matter how late she came home, no matter how much her feet ached or how heavy her shoulders sat, Celeste would find her daughter at the kitchen table, sometimes doing homework, sometimes already asleep with her head resting on an open notebook, and every single time, Celeste would stand in the doorway for just a moment, just one quiet moment, and let herself feel it. The love, the weight of it, the beautiful, terrifying responsibility of being someone's entire world. She would warm up whatever she had managed to bring home. They would sit together at a table with one wobbly leg that she had fixed 3 times with different solutions, and it still wobbled. And they would eat, and talk, and laugh sometimes. The real kind of laugh. Not the polite kind. The kind that comes from knowing someone so completely that a single look is its own language. Those moments were everything to Celeste. They were the reason she set her alarm for 4:45 every morning without hesitation. The reason she took a second job cleaning office buildings on Thursday and Friday evenings. The reason she had not bought herself a single new piece of clothing in 2 years, not one. Because every spare dollar went straight into the envelope she kept tucked behind the loose tile under the kitchen sink. Zuri's school fund, sacred, untouchable. Until the month everything fell apart at once. Zuri was 8 years old, but she had the kind of eyes that made people pause mid-sentence, deep, steady, taking everything in without giving too much back. Her teachers called her perceptive. Her classmates just knew she was the one who noticed things nobody else caught. The girl who remembered what you said 3 weeks ago. The girl who could tell when something was wrong before you opened your mouth. She wore her school uniform every day like it was important, because to her it was. Her mother pressed it every Sunday night, laid it out carefully on the chair beside her bed, and every Monday morning, Zuri put it on with the same quiet seriousness, like she understood without being told that the uniform represented something worth protecting. An opportunity, like a door that had been opened at great cost. At school, Zuri ate half her lunch and wrapped the rest in a napkin. Every day. Her teacher noticed once and gently asked if everything was okay at home. Zuri smiled and said yes. Then she went home that evening and put the saved lunch money, 40 cents, into a small plastic container she kept on her windowsill. She never told her mother about the container, but she knew exactly what it was for. She had heard her mother on the phone late at night, voice low and tight, saying the words, "I just need a little more time." Zuri did not fully understand what that meant, but she understood the tone. And she had decided, in the quiet logic of an 8-year-old who loved her mother more than anything, that 40 cents was 40 cents. She drew pictures for Celeste constantly, not random drawings, specific ones. A house with a red door and a yard. 2 figures standing in front of it. A sun in the corner that took up almost a quarter of the page because she always drew it too big. She taped them to the refrigerator herself without being asked and never took them down even when the tape dried out and the edges curled. Once, on the walk home from school, Zuri looked up at her mother and asked, completely out of nowhere, "Mama, do you think brave people are scared first?" Celeste had stopped walking, looked at her daughter, and said softly, "I think the brave ones are always scared first, baby. That's what makes it brave." Zuri had nodded slowly, like she was filing that answer somewhere important, somewhere she knew she would need it later. She needed it sooner than either of them expected. But what none of us could have known, what even Zuri herself could not have known, was that the moment she had been quietly preparing for her entire short life was now less than 3 weeks away. His name was Renzo Cavallo, and in the luxury corridor that stretched 6 blocks through the heart of the city's wealthiest district, his name was the kind that changed the temperature of a room. He was not the loudest man you would ever encounter. That was the first thing people got wrong about him. They expected someone who announced himself, someone who needed the room to know he had arrived. Renzo was the opposite. He moved quietly. He spoke sparingly. He never repeated himself. And the men around him, men who were not small, men who were not soft, watched him with the specific alertness of people who understood that stillness in someone like Renzo was not peace. It was pressure. He was in his mid-40s, broad-shouldered, the kind of face that had been handsome once and had since become something harder and more permanent, the way certain things sharpen with age instead of softening. He wore dark suits, always, never a hair out of place, not because he was vain, but because control of small things was a habit that extended to large ones. The business owners along the corridor knew his car before they saw his face. A black Mercedes S-Class that arrived at irregular times because irregular was intentional. His security team moved with him like a current, never crowding, never obvious, but always exactly where they needed to be. The valets straightened up. The boutique managers found reasons to step back from their doorways. Even the street musicians seemed to lose their tempo for a moment when he passed. Nobody talked about what Renzo Cavallo actually did in polite company. But nobody needed to. The district had a way of communicating these things without words, through the speed at which certain problems disappeared, through the names that stopped coming up in conversation after they crossed him, through the fact that in 6 years of owning a stake in nearly every significant property on this strip, not one person had ever publicly accused him of anything. Not once. There was one thing, though, one small thing that his men had noticed over the years and never once spoken about out loud. Whenever Renzo walked past a child on that corridor, a kid holding a parent's hand, a little one eating ice cream on a bench outside one of the boutiques, he would slow down, just slightly, just for a half second. His jaw would tighten the way it did when he was thinking about something he didn't want to think about. And then he would keep walking. None of his men ever asked about it. They had learned long ago that the things Renzo didn't explain were the things you did not push on. But it happened, every single time. And not one of them understood why, until the afternoon everything changed. What people did not know, what Renzo had spent 20 years ensuring nobody would ever know, was that underneath the suits and the silence and the reputation that preceded him into every room he entered, there was a memory he had never been able to bury completely. A sound, a voice, a moment from a childhood he had worked every single day to leave behind. And it was still there, waiting for exactly the right person to find it. 3 months before that afternoon on the cobblestones, Celeste had lost her second job. It wasn't her fault. The office building management company had switched cleaning contractors overnight, a corporate decision made in a boardroom by people who had never once seen the faces of the workers the decision affected. Celeste found out on a Thursday evening when she arrived at the building and her key card no longer worked. A security guard slid a printed notice under the glass partition without making eye contact. She stood in the lobby and read it twice. Then she folded it carefully, put it in her bag, walked to the bus stop, and sat down. She did not cry. She stared at the middle distance for a long time. Then she started calculating. The numbers did not work. She had known immediately that they would not. Zuri's school semester fees were due in 6 weeks. The school had already granted one extension. They would not grant another. They had been clear about that. Gently but firmly clear. In the way that institutions are when they have rules they are also uncomfortable enforcing. Without the second income, The envelope behind the loose tile was $60 short. $60 that might as well have been $600. A woman in her building, a neighbor named Gloria, who Celeste had helped move furniture twice and shared leftovers with on slow Sundays, told her about a man who lent money quickly, no paperwork, reasonable terms, just pay it back within 60 days. Celeste had hesitated for 2 weeks. She had gone over every other option first. She had called her sister in Atlanta, who was also struggling. She had looked into emergency assistance programs that had 3-month waiting lists. She had considered pulling Zuri from the school entirely, and had sat with that thought for one night, before deciding that was the one thing she absolutely would not do. Not that school. Not after everything it had taken to get Zuri through that door. So she borrowed the money. $60 became $80 with the fee attached. She was told she had 60 days. She had planned it precisely. She would have it back in 45. She never got the chance. On a Tuesday afternoon, 17 days before the agreed deadline, 2 men knocked on her apartment door. They were not the man she had borrowed from. They were the people he sent when he decided waiting was no longer something he was interested in. Big, unhurried. The kind of men who had learned that taking up physical space in a small room is its own form of language. They stepped inside without being invited, looked around slowly, and told Celeste, in a tone that was almost conversational, that the terms had changed. She told them she had an agreement. They smiled. She told them she would have the money within the month. They stopped smiling. She took a step back and felt the kitchen counter hit her spine. The apartment, which had always felt small, had never felt smaller than it did in that moment. The walls were close, the door was behind them, and her daughter was due home from school in 40 minutes. She needed them gone before Zuri walked through that door. They had no intention of leaving, and what happened in that apartment over the next 30 minutes, before Zuri's key hit the lock, was something Celeste would never describe in detail to another living person for the rest of her life. Zuri heard the voices before she reached the top of the stairs. She had been walking home from school the same route for 2 years, past the bodega on the corner, left at the hydrant with the yellow spray paint on it, up the 2 flights that always smelled like someone's dinner. She knew every sound this building made. She knew the difference between normal and wrong before her brain had finished processing what her ears had picked up. These voices were wrong. She slowed down on the 2nd-floor landing, took the last flight carefully, eye keeping close to the wall the way her mother had unconsciously taught her, not with words, but by example. The apartment door was not fully closed. Through the gap she could see movement. She pushed it open 1 inch, then 2. Her mother was backed against the kitchen counter. 2 men were standing too close. One was talking, the other was watching the room the way people watch rooms when they are making sure no one is coming. Zuri saw her mother's face, and that was the thing that broke something open inside her chest. Not the men. Not their size. Not the sound of their voices. Her mother's face. Because Celeste was not a woman who showed fear easily. Zuri had never once seen her mother look the way she looked right now, shoulders pulled in, eyes careful. Hands pressed flat against the counter behind her like she was trying to push through it. Zuri pushed the door fully open. "Mama!" The men turned. One of them laughed, the short, dismissive kind. "Go back outside, little girl." Her mother's eyes went wide. "Zuri, baby, go downstairs, go to Gloria's." And then one of them shoved her. Not hard enough to put her on the floor. Hard enough to make a point. Hard enough that Celeste's breath came out in a sharp burst and she grabbed the counter with both hands to stay upright. Zuri screamed. The man who had shoved her mother didn't even look at her. She ran forward, grabbed at his arm. He pushed her away like she was nothing. She stumbled back into the doorframe. Her mother was telling her to run, telling her to go. The other man was laughing again. And something inside Zuri, some last thin wall between fear and fury, came completely down. She turned. And she ran. Not to Gloria's apartment, not to the street corner, not anywhere small or close or safe. She ran toward the one place she had heard adults whisper about. The one name she had heard her mother's neighbor say twice in the same breath as the word fixed. She didn't have a plan. She was 8 years old. She had her mother's voice in her ears and the image of her face burned behind her eyes, and 40-cent savings on her windowsill, and a belief, fierce and irrational and completely unshakable, that someone out there was powerful enough to stop this. She just had to find him first. She had no idea what kind of man she was running toward, and she wouldn't find out until it was too late to turn back. She saw the black car first. It was pulling up to the curb outside the corridor entrance when Zuri came around the corner. Breathless, braids flying, backpack still bouncing against her spine. She had been running for 6 blocks. Her lungs were burning. Her vision was blurring at the edges from crying and sprinting simultaneously. But she saw the car, and she saw the men stepping out around it. And then she saw him. Even at 8 years old, even with zero context for who he was, beyond a name she had heard whispered once, she knew. The way you know a storm is coming before the sky has fully changed color. Something in the way the space around him reorganized itself. The valets, the passers-by, the boutique staff visible through glass storefronts, everything subtly, instinctively adjusted, like the street itself was making room. His security team formed their standard perimeter without being told, 2 ahead, 2 flanking, 1 at the car. They were professionals, trained specifically to prevent exactly what was about to happen, and they failed, not because they weren't good at their jobs, but because none of their training had ever accounted for a crying 8-year-old in a faded blue school uniform moving at full speed with absolutely nothing left to lose. She went through the gap between the 2 forward guards like water through a crack. One of them reached out. She was already past him. The second turned. She was already at the car door. And before anyone could close the remaining distance, she had grabbed Renzo Cavallo's hand with both of hers and pulled, the way a child grabs a parent, completely, without strategy, without hesitation, with the total physical commitment of someone who has decided this is the only option remaining. Renzo stopped mid-step. His lead guard was already moving forward, hand raised, voice low and firm. "Hey, step back." Renzo's other hand came up. One motion. The guard stopped instantly. Nobody spoke. The small sounds of the luxury corridor continued around them. A distant car, a shop door opening somewhere, the ambient hum of money moving through a warm afternoon. But within the immediate radius of this moment, there was nothing. Just a man and a child, and the sound of her breathing trying to find its way back to normal. She looked up at him. Her face was a wreckage of tears and determination in equal measure. Her hands were locked around his, her chin was shaking, her eyes were not. And in a voice that cracked directly down the middle, the kind of sound that bypasses every wall a person has ever built and lands somewhere undefended, she said it. "They're beating my mama. Please, please help her." Renzo did not move. His guards did not move. The entire street did not move. For 3 full seconds, which in a moment like this is an eternity, he just looked at her. Really looked. Not the way powerful men look at things they are deciding whether to acknowledge. The way a person looks at something that has just walked directly through every layer of armor they own and put its hand on something they thought was unreachable. His jaw tightened. Something moved behind his eyes. And for the first time in longer than any of his men could remember, Renzo Cavallo looked like he had been caught completely off guard. "Right now, in this moment, I want you to stop and think about what you would have done if you were standing on that street, if you had seen this little girl running, if you had watched every adult look away. Comment below, would you have stepped in? And if this story has you locked in, subscribe right now. Because what Renzo did next will stay with you." The last time Renzo Cavallo had felt anything close to this, he was 9 years old. His mother's name was Vittoria. She was a small woman with large hands roughened from years of cleaning other people's homes. The same corridor, actually, or one very much like it. Back when this district was newer and the money was louder and the people who held it were even less careful about who they hurt. Vittoria had worked 6 days a week. She had smelled like lemon cleaning fluid, and the faint trace of whatever expensive candle had been burning in the last house she serviced. She had hummed while she cooked. She had called Renzo Tesoro, treasure, even when there was nothing in the apartment worth the word. She had borrowed money once from a man who was not patient. Renzo remembered coming home from school, 9 years old, backpack on, shoes worn through at the left toe, and finding men in their apartment who moved the same way these men moved, who took up space the same way, who spoke in the same tone that was designed to remind you how small you were. He remembered his mother's face, that specific expression, controlled, careful, trying to protect him from what she was feeling, the same way Celeste had tried to protect Zuri. He remembered screaming. He remembered being physically lifted and placed outside the apartment door like he was an object. He remembered the sound of his own fist hitting that door from the outside, over and over, until his hand hurt and nobody opened it. His mother had been okay. Eventually. But something in Renzo had not recovered from the specific helplessness of that afternoon. The inability to stop it. The smallness. The door that wouldn't open no matter how hard he hit it. He had spent the next 30 years of his life ensuring he would never be on the wrong side of a closed door again. He had built power specifically and deliberately as a response to that feeling, the way some people build walls after being hurt. Except Renzo had built something with weight and reach and consequence. Something that meant no one could ever put him outside a door again. And in here, right now, on these cobblestones, was a 9-year-old version of himself looking up at him. Different face, different name, same eyes, the same specific combination of terror and refusal, the same hands that wouldn't let go, the same unspoken, unbreakable logic that said, "You are the only option I have left, and I am not leaving without help." The memory didn't arrive slowly. It didn't surface gently. It hit him the way cold water hits. Total. Immediate. Impossible to reason your way out of. And in the space between one breath and the next, 20 years of careful distance collapsed completely. He was not a mafia boss standing on a luxury street. He was a 9-year-old boy who had never stopped being angry about a door that wouldn't open. And this time, he was on the right side of it. He looked at his lad guard. His voice was quiet, completely level, the kind of level that his men had learned to recognize as the most serious register he possessed. "Get the car. Now." They were back at the apartment in 4 minutes. Renzo had said 2 words in the car. Which building? Zuri had given him the address in a single breath, the way children recite things they have memorized for safety. And then she had sat in the back seat of a vehicle that probably cost more than her entire building and held her backpack in her lap with both hands and stared straight ahead. One of Renzo's men had gently offered her water. She had shaken her head without looking up. She was focused, still in the place that running had taken her, that locked, singular space where nothing exists except the thing you are moving toward. When the car stopped, Renzo stepped out first. His team was already moving, not loudly, not dramatically, but with the specific efficiency of people who have done difficult things in small spaces before and understand that speed and quiet are not opposites. The building door opened. The 2 flights of stairs took seconds, and then the apartment door, which was still not fully closed, swung open. The 2 men inside had not been expecting company. The larger one turned first, and for 1 second, just one, he made the mistake of not moving. He looked at Renzo the way men do when they are calculating whether the situation is actually as serious as it appears. He took in the suit, the stillness, the men behind him, and something in his expression said he had not yet decided. That half-second of hesitation was the only thing that happened. Renzo's lead guard stepped forward. I said 4 words, quietly, directly, in a tone that closed every remaining door. The man's expression changed completely. He looked at his partner. Something passed between them that didn't need words, and they left. Not fast enough to be called running, but fast enough that nobody in that hallway would have mistaken it for anything other than what it was. Celeste was on the floor beside the counter. Not unconscious, not broken, but shaking in the way people shake when the adrenaline of sustained fear finally runs out of somewhere to go. 2 of Renzo's team crouched beside her immediately, careful, measured, asking quiet questions. Zuri came through the door behind everyone else and crossed the apartment in 4 steps. She dropped to her knees beside her mother, grabbed her hand, pressed it to her face, and did not let go. She did not let go for a long time. Celeste's other hand came up and covered the back of her daughter's head, pulling her close, holding on, and she said her daughter's name once, very quietly, in a voice that carried every single thing a mother feels when she realizes her child ran into danger for her. Renzo stood in the doorway. He did not come further inside. He did not speak. He looked at the 2 of them on the floor, the woman and the child holding each other in a narrow apartment with a wobbly kitchen table and drawings taped to a refrigerator, and he stayed very still for a long moment. Then he turned to his lead guard and said 3 words. Handle the debt. Celeste spent 2 days recovering. Nothing broken. The doctor that Renzo sent to the apartment that same evening confirmed it, quietly and professionally, in the way that doctors who work for men like Renzo operate. Bruised ribs, badly shaken. She would need rest, and she would need time, and she would be okay. The doctor left medication, left instructions, and left without asking for anything in return. Celeste lay in her bed that night and stared at the ceiling for a long time. Zuri slept curled against her side, refusing to be in a separate room. One small hand resting on her mother's arm as if checking, even in sleep, that she was still there. The debt was gone by morning, not renegotiated, not extended. Gone, the kind of gone that happens when someone with Renzo's particular reach makes clear that a transaction no longer exists. The man who had sent the collectors received a communication that same night. He did not send anyone else. He did not call. He did not resurface in Celeste's life in any form again. The problem, in the language of the world Renzo operated in, had been resolved. 3 days later, Celeste received an envelope slid under her apartment door. No name on the outside. Inside was a single folded piece of paper, a receipt from Zuri's school confirming full payment of the semester fees. Paid in cash. Anonymous. Celeste sat at the wobbly kitchen table and held that piece of paper for a very long time. She was not the kind of woman who cried easily. She cried then, quietly, into her own hands, because $60 had become a nightmare that had put her on the floor of her own kitchen, and someone had erased it without asking for a single thing in return. But that was not the thing nobody expected. 2 weeks after the afternoon on the cobblestones, Celeste received a phone call from the staffing agency that managed cleaning contracts for the luxury corridor. They had an opening, a full-time position, servicing 3 of the high-end properties she had worked in before, with a salary 30% higher than anything she had previously earned. The agency coordinator told her she had been specifically recommended by a property stakeholder. The coordinator did not give a name. Celeste did not ask for one. She already knew. She started the following Monday. On her first morning back in the corridor, walking those same 6 blocks in the early light, past the cobblestones where her daughter had stood crying 2 weeks before, Celeste paused for a moment at the exact spot. She looked at it. The polished stones, the designer storefronts, the quiet before the district woke up. And she thought about her daughter's question on the walk home from school. Do you think brave people are scared first? She had answered it then with her head. Standing here now, she understood it in her bones. She thought about Renzo Cavallo. A man she had never formally met, whose face she had only seen across a street in a moment of crisis. And she thought about what it means when someone who owes you nothing chooses to give you everything anyway. Not because it is required, not because there is an audience, but because something in them, buried deep beneath everything life had made them, still recognized the difference between what is wrong and what is right, and still cared enough to act on it. She straightened her back, lifted her chin, and walked into the corridor where she had spent years being invisible, except this time, something had shifted. Not the street, not the buildings, her. So what does a story like this actually mean? On the surface, it is a story about a little girl who ran toward danger to save her mother, about a man whose reputation said one thing and whose actions said something else entirely, about a debt that was never really about money, and about the moment one human being chose to see another one. Really see them. And act. But underneath that, this story is asking you something personal. How many times have you been on that street? Not literally, but in your life, at work, in your neighborhood, in your family. How many times have you seen something wrong happening and felt that pull between involvement and self-preservation? Between stepping in and looking away? Between being the person who helps and the person who walks past? And here is the harder question. If you were Zuri that afternoon, if everything you loved was on the line and every door around you was closed, would you have had the courage to run toward the one person who could help, even if that person scared you? Because I think most of us are somewhere between Zuri and Renzo on any given day, trying to be brave enough to ask for help or trying to be human enough to give it. That is what this story is really about. Before you go, I need to hear from you, because this story means nothing if it just plays and disappears. Tell me in the comments, what hit you hardest? Was it Zuri running toward the thing that terrified her? Was it Celeste fighting to protect her daughter with nothing but love and determination? Or was it Renzo, a man built from power and distance, being cracked open by a child's voice in 30 seconds flat? Tell me. Because we want to know which part of this story found you. And if you are not subscribed yet, I genuinely want you to think about this. The next story on this channel will not wait for you. It will go live. It will move people. And if you are not here, you will miss it. That is not a threat. That is just how time works. Hit subscribe so you are here when it drops. The next story we are telling involves a decision that cost someone everything. A choice made in a single moment that changed every life it touched. And it starts the same way this one did. With someone who had nothing left and one desperate move that nobody saw coming. Make sure you are subscribed before that one drops. We tell stories on this channel that stay with you, stories that find something real inside the noise. If this one did that for you, share it with one person who needs to hear it today. We will see you in the next one.